Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. I've tried to make a list of all the questions. We've had some really good ones sent in. If I don't get yours, or if I missed yours, if we have time, you can send it again or whatever. But I tried to get most of them in there, and we'll kind of go through them, and hopefully that might be a question that you might have as well. But again, if I missed one, or if I missed yours, I apologize in advance, and you can certainly either ask it as we have time tonight, or email it back to me, and I'll make sure I get to it. All right. So right now, at this point, you should all start to see here in just a second my gray Ethos screen. Okay. The first couple of questions, actually, there's three. They were from different people, but they were all about reading in files. And I know we've kind of talked a little bit about this before, but we're going to go over all three of those. It's basically the difference in opening a file versus importing in a DST file, and then also bringing in a file to digitize that maybe you've scanned in, or maybe that was a JPEG. So, for a lot of you guys when you guys are starting out, maybe I've done a file for you, or I've looked at a file for you, or whatever, and so we've sent back and forth the ISI file. Now, the ISI file, that is the condensed Ethos file. Those of you who used BE100 in the past, that file was a BDF file. That was the extension. If you use CorelDRAW, those files are CDR files. Microsoft Word, WPD. Those are files that are associated with the software. Well, for Ethos, it's ISI file. Now, to open up an ISI file, you're going to go to the Design menu. You're going to go down to Open, and then you have to tell it what kind of file that you're opening up. So where it says Files of Type right here, you have to go in and change that to ISI Design File. Now, the ISI Design File is the file that you want to, that's your most important file. Because what I can do, for example, here's one right here. It's called, no, I'm not going to use that one. Let's see. Here's one right here called Antlers. And when I open this file, I can actually turn the stitches off and see the outlines. Now, here I've got an image back here. I'm going to hide that. But these are the outlines for my stitches. Now, I can regenerate my stitches. I can go in here excuse me, and take these and make them bigger or smaller, and then regenerate my stitches. So it gives me a lot of flexibility. I can move outline points by just turning on my point editor. I can modify my stitch type by editing my stitch effect. So it gives me a lot of options. If I want a different underlay, there we go. All right, and so that's an ISI file. Now, and so you have to go to Design, and you have to go to Open. If you ever call me and say, hey, I need you to help me with a design, or if I ever do a design for you, and I know you have Ethos, that's the kind of file that I'm going to send you. If you go to, not everywhere, but there are digitizing companies that will send you back ISI files. It's just a matter of you have to ask for it and say, hey, can you send me an Ethos file? And then, and then if they use the Ethos program, they can do that for you. So you've got your ISI file, but then you have the other types of files. You have your DST file. You maybe got that from Dakota Collectibles. Maybe you downloaded it off the internet. Maybe you just had a bunch of DST files, that you've got on disk or whatever. You can't go through the open process on a DST file. You have to go to Design, you have to go to Import, and you have to go to Alien DOS. Okay? So once I go there, again, 2 pieces of information. What kind of file is it? Well, it's a Tajima DST file. It's in the T's. It's the very first one, Tajima. Then, where is the file saved to? Is it on my CD with all my other Dakota collectible files? Or is it saved on my hard drive? Is it on a USB? My downloads folder? Where is it? Once I find it, double click, and this brings in the file. Now, one of the quick ways that I can know that this is a DST versus an ISI is, notice I can't turn my stitches off. This icon over here, delete generated stitches, I can't do it. So while this file is important, if I have this same version that I created or digitized, that's the one that I want to keep. This, in essence, yes, you know, if that's all I've got, that's all I've got. But if I have the ISI version, that's the one I want. Now, here's where it gets kind of sticky. If I go in and save this file to my database, so I go design, so I brought it in, I imported it in, it was a DST file. If I go to design, save as, new design in my database, guess what? It becomes an ISI file. But I never started with the outlines. So just because all of a sudden now it's an ISI file, it doesn't mean that I have the outlines, because I never had them to begin with. Okay? So it's the same thing in if you had BE100. If you brought in a Dakota file and saved it in the old brother BE100 software, it would make it a BDF file, sure. But you still wouldn't have all of your outlines like you had if you had created it. Okay? Certain things that you can do with it, absolutely. You can go to Stitch Graduator, you can move stitches, all those things we talked about in our editing class you can do. But the biggest thing is you can't turn your stitches off to see your outlines. Okay? So those are the differences in bringing in those 2 types of formats. Now, going along with that, one of the other questions was, well, what other kind of formats can you bring in? Well, if I go to Design and I go to Import and I choose Alien DOS, on my list, I have a bunch of files on the list here. Now, all of these files might not be embroidery files, but a lot of them are. There's ZSK. That's not one that's used very often. There's the old Singer format, the old Singer embroidery, GTM. Melco Expanded, that one's pretty common. In the home market, you've got Janome, you've got JEF and SEW and Husqvarna. So, you know, you've got some old, there's Brother PES. So there's a lot of different formats that you can bring in besides just a DST. It just so happens that that the Baird, the Tajima rather, is the probably the most common. Okay. Now, oh, there's one other. Sorry, Design, Import, Melco Condensed. Some people that have bought Dakota bought the Melco Condensed files instead of the DST. Those have a CND extension. That's how you do it. Melco Condensed. I probably don't have one on here, but I just tell it where the file is, and then I just click on Open, and it opens it up. Now, you might sometimes with Melco Condensed files, you might get some strange effects. Melco Condensed files are really, really old files. So you might want to check them, before you use them. All right. Now, continuing on with that same line, the last part of that was bringing in a file to digitize. A scanned image, a JPEG, a bitmap, TIFF, something like that. What you have to do is you don't go to Design Open, you don't go to Design Import, you start a brand new design. Okay, so you can use the down arrow right here, New Embroidery Design. Now, once I'm in this blank screen, I can do two things. I can go to the Image menu. Very first option is Insert Image. The third option is Scan Image. If I'm working with a multifunction device or a scanner, then I could use this Scan Image option. Over here on the far right, the very first button on this toolbar is Insert Image. Okay, so I go there, and again, I have to tell it, well, what kind of file is it that I'm importing or inserting? At the top of my list, JPEG or bitmap, JPEG, and TIFF. After that, these are all art files. PNG, very popular. Pick it. Pick where the file is saved. And there's my artwork to digitize from. Okay? Now, if I don't open any design, so if I go here and close all these real quick, I can also bring in, under Import, a PDF file. But there's a couple of ways that we can do PDF files. We can, without any designs open, we can go to Design, Import, PDF. Okay? But what I do is, if I've got a PDF, hold on. Sorry, I thought I had a PDF all ready to go. Sorry. Goodness. Okay, so let's say that, so I've opened up a PDF file. Let's say I'm just looking at a PDF, and what I can do is I can hit the print screen button on my keyboard. Print screen is usually in the upper right-hand area. It's PRTSC usually. And like for my laptop, since I don't have just a designated print screen button, I have to do function print screen. And you're not going to think that anything happens, but it actually does. Once I do that, and I start a brand new design, I can go Control V. Control V is paste. Now look, it got a bunch of stuff that I didn't really want in there. Well, I can use my crop to crop the image. Now that was kind of a poor one, but using your print screen is a great way and quick way to bring in a design. Sometimes I'll use print screen on a JPEG or bitmap. If I've got an image that's pretty crisp and it's zoomed in and I'm looking at it from an email, instead of saving it and then starting a brand new design and going to image, insert image, and all that, I'll just hit print screen, start an Ethos design, and go Control V or Edit Paste, and then just crop out what I don't want. Okay? So that's a quick way to get your design in there to get it ready to digitize. All right? Okay, so any questions on bringing in, opening a design or importing a design or bringing in designs to work from? Everybody still hear me okay? Anybody? Maybe? Okay, very good. Thank you. All right. So the next question was using running stitches to connect between one section and another. So I'm going to get rid of this design right here. I'm just going to click on it and hit delete. I'm going to go to image, insert image. We're going to go up here to JPEG. And let's see. No, we're not. Good gracious. Okay. And I'm going to bring in a design that has a perfect example of what we're trying to do here. All right, now here's a logo that was sent. Again, I just used what we just talked about. I used the print screen, and now I can come in here and make it the size that I want. Let's just say I want it to be, let's just say 3 inches. All right, now, so one of the questions was, okay, let's say that I needed to digitize this gold in this badge. Okay? Well, first off, real quick, this is not one of the questions, but this might be something that you guys might have a question on. This image was not scanned in straight. We can kind of see that it's a little bit crooked. Okay? What I can do is go to Tools and D-Skew. Once I click on that, I have a crosshair. I can find anything in this design that I know is supposed to be straight. For example, you know, if I look from like this corner to this corner, that's supposed to be straight across. So I'll left click, I make my line on what's supposed to be straight, and I left click a second time. That straightens that up for me. Okay? That's called D-Skew. You use that. You can use it with anything, but I primarily use it with images. I click on it, Tools, D-Skew, and then I just draw a line over anything in the design that's supposed to be straight. All right, so going back to our question, let's say that I need to do these gold areas inside, underneath this white circle, this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. Okay? So I'm going to do a fill stitch, and I'm not going to take a ton of time doing this part of it. Sure. Okay. Now, I hit my right mouse button to finish, but I want to exit right here. So I move my mouse up here, I left click, there's my exit point. Now I switch over to running. Right click, switch back to fill. Now, where do I want to exit? I don't want to exit there. I want to exit there. So I'll left click, come back over to running. Right click. Now I'm just going to take this and copy and paste it just because to save some time there. Move it over. Now, my exit point's right here. It's not that terrible, but if I wanted to, I could say move exit point, move it down to here. And again, I'm just using my running stitch to go from one area to another. Now, the reason that's important is because you got to realize that when you're stitching this out, and I'm going to put my exit point there, switch back to running. When you're stitching this out, if I had not put those running stitches in and I had just made the machine trim, well, that's about 10 or 15 seconds per trim. Sorry about that. That's about 10 or 15 seconds per trim, and that's assuming that I don't have any thread pullouts right there. Yeah, that was kind of scary. So it's really important if I can, manipulate and walk around my design and eliminate any of the trims, then I want to do that, because it's much better to have it sew or stitch these little extra running stitches than it is to have your machine stop, cut, trim, and keep going. Okay, so just use now. This is for those of you guys who are comfortable with digitizing. I'm going to show you something advanced. So I do my running stitch, or my fill stitch, or satin stitch, or whatever it was. I put my exit point. Now I can hit the F5 button on my keyboard, and that switches me to my running. Right click, F6 switches to satin, F7 switches to fill. So before, when we did this over here, I would stop, come over here and click on it, and then keep going. If I'm comfortable with that, then F5, F6, and F7, while I have a crosshair on the screen, will switch me between my digitizing tools. Okay? All right. Now, we're going to leave this on the screen because even though I've got something else I'm going to show you, even though it wasn't a question on my list. But first, we're going to talk about voids. Okay? Everything is always, you've got to be conscious of getting too many stitches built up on top of each other. You're going to get puckering. Your embroidery is going to be thick and sometimes bulletproof, so to speak. All right? So if we can, we try to come in and figure out a way to void out areas underneath. Now, let me just put a little disclaimer on this, okay? If I've got a small fill area and I've got some tiny letter or some, let's say, lettering that's less than 3/8 of an inch, I'm not going to void out underneath those, okay? These are for bigger areas where I've got maybe 2 fill stitches on top of each other, or I've got a big, thick letter on top of it. Those are the kind of things I'm talking about. Going back to this design, there's no way I would ever try to void out anything in, underneath the brown on this white, okay? So just make sure, we're clear on that. Step shape cutaway, the way it works is my bottom layer has to be a fill stitch. Just a basic standard fill. It can have any stitching direction, doesn't matter. But what's sitting on top of it can be a fill or it can be a satin. Either one of those 2 items. If we have another fill, I'm just going to do like a donut shape. So now I've got red stitches and I've got green on top of that. Okay? What I can do, grab the bottom layer, hold down my Shift key, and grab what's on top. Go to Outlines, Step Shape Cutaway. It's going to void out the area underneath, and it's going to give it a little bit of overlap. So now, there's my red. Of course, there's my green. Oh, sorry. There's my green. If I didn't want that green, I could still delete it, and I've still got my void there. Okay? Now, that's with a fill on top of a fill. Let's say that you have a nice, thick, bold letter. On top of here. Again, same thing. I don't want to waste all that red stitching underneath there. Select the bottom, hold down my Shift, select the top, Outlines, Step Shape Cutaway. And there we go. Okay? So that's your Step Shape Cutaway. All right. Now, this question just came in just a second ago, but I think you guys might, you might like it. All right. Look at my border. See how detailed that is? It's made up of a bunch of little satin pieces. Well, I could zoom in and digitize each one of those as a satin. Sure, but that's going to be a pain. I can take a running stitch, create a circle, line point, curve point, tab. Okay? Line point at the top, curve at the bottom, tab closes my shape. I can then take that circle, and I'm basically making it to where it's kind of on the inside of my border. Okay? Now I'm going to zoom in. I'm just going to use a different color. And I'm going to digitize one of these pieces. And I'm going to exit right here. Okay? Now there's one. Now, I could sit here and digitize every one of these all the way around. Okay? Or I can select my circle, use my Shift key, select my shape, go to Tools, Path Copy, tell it how many copies I want. Now here, I don't know. I can either count those or I can guess. I'm going to guess at 75. Say OK. I probably could have done 76. So I say, let me say undo. Let's go back to Tools, Path Copy. Let's say 76. Now I'm going to get rid of that one. I can come in here. If I fatten those up just a little bit, perfect. Now you're saying, okay, well that's not too bad, but you got those little running stitches in there too. Well, all right, well first off, let's go in here and take all of these, all the blue, Outlines, Compensation, Expand Satin, boom. I fattened them up. I just used 0.2. Now they're all overlapped. Okay? Now what I can do, I'm going to go with a different color, and I'm going to create a running stitch around this one. But I'm not going to do it all the way. I'm going to stop. See where I stopped? Kind of right there. Now, again, I take this, hold down my Shift key, I get my running stitch, Tools, path copy, 76, was what I had before. I can get rid of this circle. I don't need it anymore. I can also get rid of the very first one. Oh, I must have messed up my order. Let's see, hold on. Not a problem. Now I'd have to adjust. The only thing I've got to do here is tell it 2 U-turns. And there we go. And there's my border with my running stitch, extra border on top of that. Again, that's getting a little more advanced, but the question did come in, and so you never know when you might have to do that. And it was pretty quick and pretty easy to do. All right, so we're going to keep going. We got quite a few more questions to cover, so let's just do this. Let's do Control-A for select all, delete, and we're going to keep going. Now, the next question came in, had to do with lettering, all right? And it had to do with manipulating of individual letters. So we're going to go T for text. We're going to pick a font. We're going to pick a size. And I'm just going to type in some lettering. Now, adjusting this lettering, moving it closer together, moving it further apart. First off, if I want to move it further apart or closer together, I can double click inside, and this is my inner character spacing. Move it up or move it down. Yes, definitely. This class is being recorded too, by the way. Now, sometimes with some fonts, you have to move it up 3 or 4 before it actually starts shrinking it together. Depends on how they were created and how they were kerned. If you just go up 1 or you just go down 1 and you think it should be moved closer together and then all of a sudden it spreads it out a little bit, don't be alarmed. Just go down a couple of more and then it'll start squeezing them together. Okay? But using this feature allows me to do kerning on all the letters, or I'm in T for text, I can click just in between 2 characters and kern just in between those. Okay? Now, there's 2 other ways that we can adjust our kerning. I can go in and notice on this lettering, and this is on all lettering, that you have a crosshair somewhere on the font. You can see it right there on the A. You can see it there on the T. Well, you'll see that on every character. Now, I'm not in text mode. I have my regular select arrow. I can hold down the letter S for Sam and left click on that crosshair, and that will grab just that letter, which at that point I can move around, I can make bigger, I can change it in any way that I want, but it's still part of the text. Okay? So hold down, so you're not in text mode, you hold down the S for Sam, you left click on the crosshair, and that gives you that character. Okay? Now the other way that you can do it is you can take all the lettering, you can go to text and separate. Now by doing this, you've lost the text properties. I can't go T for text and highlight it anymore, but what I can do is grab each letter separate. And so I could grab this, I could use my control arrow and move it in 1 millimeter increments or whatever I wanted to do with it. Okay? If I've got to go in and make some major modifications, like, I don't know, maybe this T was supposed to be building or whatever, then I might separate it out, because then I can just delete that, come in and, digitize, my shape or whatever it is, and then I can say, okay, let's look at my sewing sequence, and then drag it to where it's supposed to go. So if I've got to do some major modification on lettering like that, sometimes I will separate it. It will make it just a little bit easier. Okay? All right. Now, let's see here. All right. So again, I'm just going down the list of these questions. One of the questions came in, and whoever submitted the question, they want their pitch to always be, to start default at 0.35. The ethos, the pitch or the density in ethos defaults to 0.40, but they would like theirs to be 0.35. So we're going to start a brand new blank design. We've not digitized anything. If we come over here and click on step digitizing, see it like I'm going to digitize a fill stitch, it shows me my step stitch. Here will allow me to adjust my pitch. Now I can type in any number that I want. 0.37. They want it to be 0.35. I'm going to say OK. I don't actually have to digitize anything. Right click, do the same thing for my satin. Click here, 0.35, say OK. Again, I don't have to digitize anything. Now I'm going to go to Design, Save As Template. I'm going to overwrite my default template. It tells me it already exists. Do I want to replace it? Yes, I do. So now, whenever I start a brand new design, if I want to use a fill stitch, there's my default pitch is set. I don't want to digitize anything on that screen that I'm saving as my default template. I just want to change those stitch settings. And I can change other things. I could have changed the length. I could change my underlay. Whatever settings that I personally like to use, I can save that so that every time I start a design, it doesn't, it starts at those stitch settings. Okay? All right. Now, let's see. Talked about that. All right, let's talk about, for just a minute, puffy foam. Okay? Puffy foam is traditionally done with a satin stitch. Okay? So the way puffy foam works in a nutshell is you have this foam that you've bought. Typically it's from embroidery supply places, sewingmachine.com, Ganold, Madeira, wherever you get your embroidery supplies, they probably have puffy foam for sale. You lay that in your hoop, then you stitch on top of it, and then you pull off the parts that you don't want. So that's it simplified. But let's kind of dive into it just a little bit more. Let's say that we're going to do a letter. We'll just do the letter T. Now, okay, so this is my design, and it's going to be done in puffy foam. All right. The way puffy foam works is that the stitches cut the puffy foam. Well, that's all fine and good for this part, and this part, and this part, and this part, but what about this part, and this part? We have to go in and close up those sections. So what we do is I say, okay, satin, point, counterpoint, point, counterpoint. I can exit right here, use my running stitch, run over to here, right click, satin, point, counterpoint, point, counterpoint, right click, use my running stitch, down to here, satin, point, counterpoint, point, counterpoint. All right. Now, I then take this and I say edit, reorder to end. So now when this stitches out, when we do a slow redraw, it's capping my ends. And unfortunately, when I'm doing a foam, that's what I have to do. That's the first thing I have to do. The next thing I have to do is I have to adjust my pitch or my density. Remember, normally it's to 0.4. You know, just a second ago when we were messing around with the default, we changed it to 0.35. We still have to go tighter. For puffy foam, 0.18. Now, I would never ever recommend you use this density or this pitch on anything other than puffy foam. Okay? I also don't really need any underlay, so I can take this to tacking. So I've got 0.18, tacking, say OK. Now, this design is ready to stitch for puffy foam. Once I stitch it, and I pull off the parts that I don't want, you know, that goes in my recycle bin or whatever, I still probably have little fuzzies over here and over here. I have to heat it. Okay? So, what I do is I take a hairdryer, set it to its hottest setting, and that's how I heat it. And that will pull and suck those little fuzzies back up underneath there. Yeah, you can do a heat gun also. You just have to be real careful that it doesn't get too hot, because you can melt that foam in there. So yeah, a heat gun works really well. I've seen a couple other things, but yeah, there's a couple options. But you definitely want to heat it up. Now, what if, let's take that one step further and say, okay, well that's all good, but I need a border on this. This is a two-color design. Traditionally, you would just put a border around this letter, and that would be it. But with puffy foam, it's a little bit different. With puffy foam, my border is not going to be puffy. It's going to be straight satin, and it's going to be underneath my letter. So with regular borders, you sew the item and then you sew the border. With puffy foam, it's backwards. We can still put an automatic border on there. We're going to make it kind of wide. We'll make it a different color. And now we're going to take this border and we're going to say edit, reorder to start. So it's going to sew my regular satin border, and then it's going to come in and do my foam. And what you want is you might have to go in and exaggerate this border. See how much wider I've made it? Okay? because that foam is going to have a tendency to pull on you. But when you're doing a two-color like that, the bottom, your border, so to speak, is going to be regular embroidery. It's not going to be 3D, and it's going to stitch first, and then your foam design is going to stitch on top of it. Okay? All right, let's keep going. One of the questions was, actually I had 3 or 4 questions about fonts. Okay? The first question was, what if I want to create my own font? Well, for most of you guys, the Artisan Plus package, while it doesn't have the font creator icon, or the font creator option, here's the way you create fonts. You start by digitizing all the characters that you want. So what I do is I'll bring in artwork, whether it's JPEG or bitmap or whatever. I'll adjust the artwork until my lettering is about 10 millimeters or 3/8 of an inch. That's kind of where I like to be when I create keyboard my own lettering. I like my lettering to start at 10 millimeters, because if I figure if I can get it to write at about 10, I should be able. That should do me pretty good for a little bit smaller and a little bit, and bigger too. So that's where I start. So what I do is I'll go in and I'll digitize every one of my characters at, and so I'll have like, A through E, and then the next one, and so on and so forth. All right. So what I'll do for you guys that don't have font creation is, if you want to take the time to digitize all the uppercase, all the lower, and then any numbers that you want, if you send me that file already completed, I'll turn it into a font for you. Okay? So, like for example, if I look in my database, I've probably got, let's see, I'll tell you what, here's a way I can do it. Hold on. Okay, Varsity. Varsity was one that I created. So see, here's one that, a design that you can see, and see how I digitized. See, I brought them all in. I made sure they were the same size. I digitized them all. And then I had to go through, I used a feature in the software to add them and make them into a font. Now again, like I said, most of you guys don't have that part, but if you'll do this part, I'll do the rest for you, and make it into a font for you. It's not so much a version that you need to do this, it's the level. You guys are mostly on Artisan Plus. That feature is not available except for on Virtuoso Plus. So I did it at Varsity, and so now we come back over here. We go T for text, go down my list. Here's my Varsity, and there's my lettering. All right. So it takes a little bit of work to get it to this point right here, but once you're there, it's not too bad to do the rest of it. Okay? Now, that goes along with, that kind of continues on into, well, can we use other fonts in Ethos? There's a couple of ways that you can use other fonts in Ethos. First off, a lot of times you might buy a DST file that's fonts. What happens is that they'll send you files that are A through Z upper, A through Z lower, and each one's a separate file. So when you have to use it, it's like, I got to find the A, I got to go through, it's kind of a hassle. So but sometimes the fonts are very pretty fonts. Well, if that's the case, if that's what you've done and you've bought this font, here's what I recommend. I recommend importing in all of the characters. Now I'm going to have a whole bunch of boxes up here. Instead of just these 4 designs, I'm going to have a box for every design. And so I'm going to have to say, okay, I'm going to start with my A, and I'm going to take my B, and I'll copy and paste it in my A. And so it's going to take me a few minutes on that side to where I'm copying and pasting basically all the fonts into one big design. And then I save that design. It's going to look something like this right here. So then if I want to use it, I can come in here and just say, okay, I want these 3 characters. Copy. Go to my new design. And paste. And then I just have to, move them or whatever. That's a lot better. It was a little bit of work on the front side to have to copy and paste all those into one file. But once it's done, it's it saves me a lot of time trying to find them and open them and all that. Okay. Now the other thing is that you can use true types. You can go T for text, click on this T, and these are my true types that I have in my system. Now I can use true types 3 different ways. First off, I can use them as a running stitch. So if this was going to be applique, then I would want this to say running. And this, in essence, becomes my mark outline. I can then add a border to it, outline, text, add text borders, tell it my width, tell it my color. I've just made an applique file. Okay? So I can use them that way. I can use them as a fill stitch. And then sometimes I have to go in, change my stitch angle, adjust my stitch settings. These are kind of small. All right. And then the final way is that I can go in and use those true types and convert them to satin. Now, not every true type is going to convert to a satin. This S is probably not going to convert very well. It's something that actually didn't do too bad, but you're not always going to get great results. Okay, it's something that I hope that they master very soon. But I'm just going to be perfectly honest. You can do it. You might, not every true type font is going to make, is going to convert to a good satin stitch. So anyway, that's kind of the way that you can use other fonts in Ethos. All right. Now that takes us on into the auto digitizing aspect. There's vector files that you can get, that you might have, that you don't have to go in and digitize. Everybody that's on version 12 or above that has Artisan Plus has auto vector conversion. I can say design, import. I've got AI, DXF, EPS. These are all standard vector files. If I've got one, let's see. Okay, so here. All right, standard vector file. If I click on it, it tells me that it's a vector object. if I want to convert that straight to embroidery, I can either convert the entire design by using this option, auto stitch drawing outlines, and that does the whole thing, or I can click on a section and tell it convert vector to running, convert vector to satin, convert vector to step or fill. Those three options. This makes it a fill stitch. There we go. I can do anything to that fill stitch just like I had digitized it myself. I can change my sewing angle. I can adjust my stitch type. I can change my color, change my underlay, move my exit point, anything. Here, we say, okay, now let's just see what happens. We want to make it a satin. Now this is really big letters. We probably wouldn't do a satin on something this big, but you can see that it didn't do a very good job. All right? There's just too much going on for it to, first off, it's way too big to be a satin stitch anyway, but you can see that the angles that it tried to put in there, it tried to do some branching, and you know, while it probably wouldn't sew out horribly, it's probably not the way you would have done it if you had digitized it yourself. And then the final way is by running stitch, and there we go. And once you click that, that turns it into a running stitch. Now, this letter over here has a void. If I just click on this and tell it to convert it to a fill stitch, it's not going to pick up that void. But what I can do, pick the outside, Control Shift, pick the inside, and then convert it. And that will pick up and tell it, hey, that's a void. Okay? And there we go. All right. The last question on my list was about gradient. I don't know that we're going to really get into it very much, but if I take a shape and so I'm giving it a negative 36-degree angle, okay? And now I can come in here on top of that, separate color, digitize, I can do digitize right on top of it, or I can just cut off a part of it. Now, big thing is I want my stitch angle to be the same, but once I get the second part, I can go to Edit Local Stitch Effect. I don't want any underlay, and I want a very open stitch type pattern. And I can change it, to whatever I want. And so to get whatever gradient I'm trying to get, I can adjust that stitch, that pitch. Now also see there is a running stitch. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see it right there. Well, that's going to mess up my gradient. So I can take this and play with my exit point, tell it to exit over here, and now I've eliminated that. So if I come in here, move up my pitch. So you want the stitch direction to be the same thing, and then you want to adjust your pitch to start to get those gradient effects. And what I could do is I could even come in here and say, okay, let's go to 1.5. And then let's come in here with a third color even and say, okay, we're using my step 1. We're on color 3. And now here, I've got to give this the same stitch angle, -36. And also I've got to tell it to start stitching right there. And there we go. And so that's building kind of my gradient. I know we didn't have a whole lot of time to talk on that, but that's kind of how we do the gradient. All right.